Hi, it's Mo and welcome back to the property vlog and some very exciting news we've got to share. So I'm very pleased to announce that we've exchanged on a former school site in Exeter, which will be converted to 25 incredible homes. And this will be a mixture of apartments and houses. So I thought I'd run through a top 10 checklist of things to check before you exchange on your next development. So first up is the GDV, or gross development value. So one of the most important things that you want to make sure you've got nailed. This is basically how much the units that you're creating are going to be worth when you finish the project. So the best way to look at this is to look at local sold comparables in the area, go and speak to local agents, give them your designs and get them to price it up. And you'll also want to get a RICS valuation on the final GDV as well. Next up is desirability. So as well as the actual GDV of the scheme, you also want to know how desirable are the units and how easily are they going to sell. So this is all about designing the kind of units and the kind of houses and apartments or whatever you're designing that will effectively fly off the shelf in that local area. So what is their demand for? Is there demand for downsizers to move into ground floor flats? Is it demand for units with balconies? Do people want gardens? How much parking do they want? Do they want electric charging? What kind of spec level do they want? It's not just about the GDV, it's also about how desirable those units are going to be. Next up, you're going to want to make sure you've checked all your legals. So this will be things like checking the title for covenants, making sure you've got a clean title, and any other legal restrictions that might be in place on the site that you need to be aware of before you exchange. Next up, it's good to get an idea of what the holding costs are going to be. So this is things like insurance, any council tax, any business rates, whatever else it is in there, utilities, those kind of things. They might seem like quite small amounts. We've just done insurance on one of our schemes and it was actually 40 grand. So it can be really, really material. So you do want to check that you've covered all of your bases on holding costs and you've got them all in your appraisal and in the cash flow. Depending on the site that you're buying, there'll be varying levels of surveys that you'll want to complete before you exchange. You might want to do structural surveys, you might want to do contamination surveys, things like that. So just make sure that you've thought about what surveys you want pre-exchange, bearing in mind that once you've exchanged, you've committed to the purchase, and what surveys you're going to have done either after exchange or post-completion. Next up is works costs. So off the back of the surveys, that should help you inform what your works costs are going to be, whether you're using a per square foot rate, a per square meter rate, whether you're using comparables from different projects that you've done that are sort of similar to the ones you're doing. You need to make sure that you've got an idea on what your works costs are going to be. You've got some contingencies in there and that you're confident with the works cost number that you've got in your appraisal. Next up is planning. So really, really important one, depending on whether you're buying subject to planning, whether you're buying unconditionally, whether you're buying on an option, whatever the format is, you need to make sure that you're very clear on what the planning position is. What's the current use? What use class is it? What are you trying to get? Have you had planning advice? Have you got a planning consultant you're working with? Have you done a pre-app? Are you working sort of with the council? Is it a speculative scheme? Is it a bit of a punt, or is it have you got a planning compliance scheme? Really, really important before you exchange to make sure that you understand what the planning implications are. Next up is contributions. So things like Section 106, affordable housing, CIL, community infrastructure levy, You need to check what the position is on these items before you exchange, because they can potentially be big line items in your appraisal. You also want to check if there's any kind of vacant building credit that is applicable to the scheme. Next up is finance costs. So depending on how you're financing the deal, you need to make sure that you're very clear on how the finance is going to work and how much it's going to cost. What are the fees, arrangement fees? Are there fees going in? Are there fees coming out? What's your interest rate? What's the term of the loans if you're using loans? How long do the loans run for? And are you going to have your project delivered and sold out before then? Are you going to refinance? Are you buying with bridging initially to get planning and then you're going to go onto a different product? You need to have your finance offers in place before you exchange, and you need to know exactly how much they're going to cost you once you've completed. And finally, and sort of most importantly, the sort of whole point of doing the project, and something that will feed in from all of the other things I've mentioned, is the actual investment return. So what is the return that you're looking to make as a developer on the project? What is the return that your investors expect to make? Essentially, is the project viable with the contingencies that you've got in, with all of the works costs you've got in there, with the range of GDVs and the desirability of those units, and factoring all of the surveys, the consultants, the fees, the planning, the time, the finance costs, factoring everything in. Have you got a decent margin on the project, and is it viable? So I hope you enjoyed that video on the top 10 things to make sure you've got in place before exchange. We're really excited to have exchanged on this new unit in Exeter, and we can't wait to show you around. Please remember to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next week.